Welcome to Help I'm a Parent, Christian Parenting in the Real World. We're so happy that you've invited us to enter into your home, your church, or wherever you may be gathered today. We're delighted you've joined us in this program as we discuss your God-given role of parenting.
We are your hosts, Drs. Claudio and Pamela Consuegra, and together we serve as the Directors of Family Ministries for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We believe that one of the most important roles you will ever play is that of being a parent.
In the midst of a secular society, it's easy to leave God out of the training of our children. The purpose of this series is to not only put God back into the equation, but to place Him at the very center.
Parenting stretches us and shapes us like no other experience on this earth. It is a sacred responsibility, and there's no higher calling. It's a calling that has its share of joys as well as challenges. It's a calling that demands a big investment on your part if it is to yield results. And yet the returns on that investment will last throughout eternity.
Today we're going to discuss rules and rebellion. Childhood involves numerous transitions and changes. Part of the tween transition involves your child becoming more independent. Whether you like it or not, your child is becoming less dependent on you as the years go by. After all, isn't that what we really want? We want our children to be more independent, to grow up to be responsible adults who make responsible decisions on their own.
These can be very trying years because as that independence broadens, so does a certain amount of rebellion, defiance, discontent, and restlessness. Emotions can run high during these transition years, and those terrible mood swings can sometimes become a common occurrence.
So how do we handle that rebellion? How do we establish rules and guidelines that are age appropriate? And how do we guide that independent thinking into rational and responsible decision making?
Our special guests for today are Dr. Eric and Anne Marie Bates. Together, they currently serve as the Family Ministries Directors for the Carolina Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Dr. Eric Bates holds the Master of Divinity from Andrews University Theological Seminary and a doctoral degree in Biblical Counseling from Westminster Theological Seminary. Currently, he is the senior pastor of the Arden Seventh-day Adventist Church located in Asheville, North Carolina.
Eric and Anne-Marie have 3 sons, a daughter, and a daughter-in-law. Welcome, Dr. Bates and Anne-Marie. Glad to have you here.
Thank you for being here.
It's good to be here.
Yeah.
You know, before we begin our conversation with Dr. Bates and Anne-Marie, we want to visit in the home of the Cortez family as they share with us their personal challenges of dealing with rules and rebellion in their 2 children.
I am the father of 2 wonderful, dynamic, and very active boys. One of them is 10, the other one is 8. And one of the rules that we have in the home is that we don't have fighting. But you have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, so they break the rule almost on a regular basis.
Get out of my face! Oh!
Hey, come on. What's the problem?
All right, what's going on
What's
here?
the problem? So what do you do? What do you do? One of the things that we do is a timeout. Timeout. Hey,
right,
go sit on the steps.
iPad.
Come on.
You guys
No more
fight over
iPad.
the iPad.
And I know that's very basic. We have the steps right here, and we can say, hey, go and sit down. And we add minutes because there are times when the steps don't work anymore, and when they come and they sit on the steps, they keep on talking back from the steps, so we add minutes.
They think they're, as they get older, that they're old enough to make their own decisions, especially our oldest child. He sometimes can come across as a little defiant.
So what are you going to do?
Time out for another 3 weeks. That would make me happy.
Okay, so you stay here. We'll talk later.
Come on.
Let me know when you're ready.
He just wants to prove that he's becoming, I guess, a little man, which can be interesting, What kind of discipline do we use? Because we can't use the same techniques we used as when he was a child. Our youngest, he's a little more stubborn. So at times we have to repeat things often and to try to get him to understand, okay, you need to do your homework. You need to do your homework. You need to do your homework. Until he'll do it slowly. He'll sit there pretending to do homework, and he won't be.
use the force.
We have to come and sit down next to him and actually take time to help him do homework. All right, let's see. How about this one? Give me this toy. We've noticed that to do homework or do the music or do chores around the house, sometimes you gotta say, okay, if you do this, we'll give you some extra time with electronics. You can play extra time on your Wii or on your games, on your iPad. And we've noticed that's helped a little bit because, of course, this day and age, all kids love playing with their electronics.
Mega shot.
But we try to make it work. You know, we try to be consistent in the setting the same, rules for both to follow. So it's interesting as a parent because things do change as they get older, and you learn and discover as they grow up.
The Cortez family have 2 boys. We had 2 girls, and we could always say it's not just boys or it's just girls. It seems like every kid has that stage in life when they want to be independent and they sort of rebel against the rules of the parents. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
This is such a difficult, or can be such a difficult age because of that transition that's taking place. Because in the earlier years, building up to this age group, we've been making most of their decisions for them.
Yeah.
We've been their motivation.
Right.
The carrot and the stick methods, rewards and punishments in order to get them to do what we want them to do. But our goal is for them to be making decisions based on the biblical teachings, the principles that we've taught them earlier on, to make them from their own heart.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
Well, through instruction and training. We had the privilege of pastoring a church near an Army post where they train all of the helicopter pilots for the Army.
Okay.
And the flight education has really 2 parts. The first part is the ground school. It's in the classroom where they're learning about the make of the construction of the equipment that they're going to be flying.
Okay.
But also the physics of flying.
Right.
They're learning about gravity and they're learning about lift.
Right.
And then once they've learned that, they transition to the cockpit where they have a flight instructor beside them. Now, initially, the flight instructor has the controls.
Yes.
But as the student learns to trust what they've learned in the classroom, they've learned to trust the laws, the theory, then the controls are turned over to the student.
All right.
And he's able to realize practically how this all comes together because he trusts his education, he trusts what he's been instructed, and he trusts the training that he's received.
So as a parent, how do you do that as far as, at which point do you begin to release that control to the kids?
Well, we're actually in that phase from the 8 to 12 age group. That's when you're in the cockpit with the child.
Okay.
Hopefully, and it's a good analogy. It's not a perfect analogy, though, because hopefully you've been doing some training from the time that they were born, as well as some teaching, more teaching probably than training from birth.
Right.
But now we're in the phase where we're transitioning, and the goal is to get them flying solo.
Yeah.
So this is a practice ground right now, where we're letting them take the reins in certain decisions, in certain things that they do within the confines of their maturity. So they gain freedoms as they demonstrate responsibility. And Ephesians actually talks about this in Ephesians 6:4. It says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord."
Yeah.
So that teaching and training that Eric was talking about with flight school would be the discipline and the instruction. Discipline actually requires a proactive phase. We tend to think of discipline as being corrective.
Right.
But the more, Ben Franklin, he said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Right.
So the more proactive you are with your training of your children, then the less correction you'll have to do. There will still be a time and a place for correction, but it's better to be more proactive. And then on the other side of the coin, we have the instruction. And that word actually in that text, in the original language, means to put into the mind and heart. So we're making investments into the minds and hearts of our children, placing those principles there. And during this time period, we're starting to call on those principles, appealing to them to use them.
I think many parents would say, but it's not working that way for me. My child is in that cockpit and wants to fly solo, and they're not ready, and they are going to crash, and I've lost control. I'm no longer in there with them. So what would you say to those parents who are really struggling with this whole issue of defiance, in their child?
Well, assessing for one thing. The text that Anne-Marie just shared, Ephesians 6, talked about provoking your children to anger. So I look at myself, I look at what I'm contributing to the problem. I assess, is there some inconsistency? You know, children have hypocrite radar. You know, they pick up when we're being inconsistent. So I assess my own life, and am I requiring them to uphold a standard that I'm not upholding myself? You know, if you're training a parrot how to talk, you have to have a greater vocabulary than the parrot.
You hope anyway.
You hope, right. So the idea with parenting is if I'm wanting my child to exercise the will in a good way.
Things like self-discipline,
Exactly.
time management.
I have to exercise the same as well.
So when it comes to setting rules or boundaries for our children, it's not just do as I say,
Right.
Absolutely.
but it's also do as I model.
Right.
That I am modeling the same types of behavior that I want you to exhibit.
Exactly.
Which I guess in a way also goes back to your marriage. Because if you don't treat each other respectfully, if you're arguing all the time, you're really teaching your kids that's the way that you communicate.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Candidly, when our kids argue, I hear us. So whenever they argue, I try to recall that and think,
Something they picked up
yeah, this
along
is something
the way.
we need to correct in the way we communicate with each other so that they can learn from our example.
Yeah.
You know, there's that old debate over spending time with our kids. Is it the quality or the quantity
Right.
that we spend? And the answer is yes, it's both.
That's right.
And when it comes to the area of discipline and establishing rules and disciplining for violations of the rule, the relationships are so important with our children. So we need to be spending a lot of time with our kids, getting to know their hearts, getting to know the motivation of the heart, what's driving them, what idols of the heart they might have. And so we can speak to their heart, and through that time, through that quality and quantity of time, we've built relationship, built trust with them. And so they see us more or less as adversaries, but more of being on the same team, working together. We want the best for them.
Right.
And so we're walking alongside of them, leading the way.
So I really hear you saying, Pastor Eric, that sometimes misbehavior or rebellion is really a cry for attention. Is I need time with you,
Yes.
you know, and I'm not getting it any other way.
Yeah.
So the only way I can get it is to misbehave. Well, that's what I'll do. That's what I'm really hearing you say.
In fact, one of my professors used to say, and you might have heard this before, positive attention is better than negative attention, but negative attention is better than no attention at all.
Right.
So if you're not giving quality and quantity time, they're craving that attention, and sometimes they do it by acting out.
Yes.
Time out, it's one way to resolve that rebelliousness maybe. But sometimes I wonder if we sort of reward our kids with timeouts. You know, if I tell my child, go to your room, they're probably going to play anyways. Maybe they don't even want to do what I had asked them to do anyway. So are there any other options beside timeout that we could help our kids to be
Yes.
less rebellious or to use their maybe negative energy in a positive direction?
Well, even the way that we use timeout can be different. We actually used a different form of timeout with our kids whenever they were fighting, like the siblings on the video.
Right.
We would separate them as a form of timeout, but they weren't to go to their rooms and play. There was a purpose to the separation. It was to give them time to cool off,
Okay.
which is a good anger management technique anyway.
Yeah.
Give them time to cool off and ask them to think about what God's Word says about human relationships and conflict resolution, and ask them to think about what part they contributed to the conflict,
Okay.
not about what the other person did to provoke them.
And then did you bring them back? I should say.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and
So it wasn't just go think about it, but now come back and talk about it.
no, and that's going to vary from child to child.
That's
You know,
right.
there are some children that it takes a long time before they reach that point where they're ready.
And what you're saying right now is really the purpose, as you described, that's the purpose of discipline.
Yes.
You know, to disciple our children,
Yes.
to make sure that whatever discipline we use, that it is on the process or on the road to getting them to act the way we want them to in the manner that God wants for
Yes.
them.
There are three basic principles that I try to use. I use them as the 3 R's to help me remember. When there's a discipline problem, we can ask ourselves, am I correcting in the right way? Is it right for me to correct? In other words, is this something that I'm reacting to because I've been inconvenienced or embarrassed or whatever?
Let's go on with the others after we take a break, because this is important.
Yes, yes.
So wait for a couple of minutes and come back, because we're going to hear about all those 4 R's. They are very important, and they will tell us what those 4 R's are. You can probably already tell that we will not be able to cover every area, every concern, or every question you may have in the short time that we have together. Parenting will continue to produce new challenges and new questions every day. As our children grow and change, so do the parenting challenges we face.
And therefore, our goal is to continue this conversation with up-to-date resources and practical parenting tips that you can apply in your day-to-day parenting journey. We will do this online via our website, www.helpimaparent.org. And there you may keep up to date on all of our newly released parenting resources, supplemental products, and even find additional materials to download free of charge.
You're also invited to submit any questions that were not answered for you, subscribe to an electronic newsletter, read a blog for parents, and much more. Again, the accompanying website is helpimaparent.org.
And in addition to that website, we also have a Facebook page where we post daily words of encouragement and resources. So look us up on Facebook, Help, I'm a Parent. And remember, share that Facebook post with the friends in your social network.
It is our desire that this resource will assist you in your God-given role as a parent by using principles that are firmly grounded in the Word of God. Now let's get back to our conversation with today's guests. We want to welcome you to our conversation with the Bates about rebellion and responsibility. And I know, Anne-Marie, you mentioned 3 R's, and I said 4, but I wanted you to continue with the 3 R's.
Yes.
So again, the first one?
The first one is it right? In other words, am I responding because I've been offended, or am I responding because God's law has been offended, or because a relationship has been hurt, or rule broken, etc.?
So that's a question for parents to ask.
Yes.
Is it right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then all of these are for the parent to ask himself or herself.
Okay.
The second would be, is it reasonable? So the consequence that I'm applying to this situation, does it fit the crime? It should be commensurate to what has been done, not over the top and not too little that it's not going to get the child's attention.
Is it right? Is it reasonable?
And I would add regular. There needs to be consistency with the rules. A lot of times we'll establish a rule, and if they violate it one day, we come down on them.
Yeah.
The next day, it's ignored.
Well, then they don't know
That's
which
true.
one to listen to.
Exactly. And that conflict, the confliction there, the contradiction causes the child to be at ease. And so they need to have a constant line where they understand this is safety. This is what the rule is.
The
So I
line
would say
can't
regular.
move. It can't be here
That's right.
today and over there tomorrow.
Right. And I would even say that our discipline response for rule violations need to be regular as well. So we don't go overboard for a minor infraction. And when there's a major infraction, we don't ignore it. So even the discipline needs to be consistent.
Right.
Now that will vary from child to child, though, because based on temperament. I have one son where you drew a line in the sand and said, "Don't cross that line," and he would do everything he could to stay on this side of the line while trying to cross it. Another son would step boldly across the line and look at you and smile and say, "There you go. What are you going to do about
What
it?"
are you going to do now?
One might have a more teachable heart, a more sensitive heart, and so the discipline approach might be different depending on the temperament. My daughter's heart is very
Important
soft.
point. We can't treat every child the same and discipline the same.
Right.
Right.
So the discipline may vary a little bit, but the rule is still the same.
Right.
The rule applies all the time.
Right.
So the 3 R's again.
Is it right?
Is it right?
Is it reasonable?
Is it reasonable?
Is it regular?
Regular. And I think you had one more.
Is it redemptive? And I think this is the most important because the way God deals with us whenever we go astray, His focus is always on bringing us back into relationship with Him. And that's ultimately what breaking the rules is about, is hurting relationships and hurting people. And also the safety of the child, spiritual safety, emotional safety, physical safety.
So we're not just looking at punishing them
Right.
because they did something wrong,
Right.
but rather
Right.
try to redeem them from the wrong and bring them back to the right.
Exactly.
Not punitive, but
Yes.
redemptive.
Yeah.
And there again, what an opportunity to teach them about God's mercy and God's grace as we bring that element, that fourth element, which is so beautiful. I love that you actually brought the redemptive element into this topic of rules and rebellion and discipline.
So even when they break the rules, you embrace them, you express their love for them, but also explain to them this is the reason why we had to take the actions that we had.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
We want our kids to see us as their allies, that if we're moving together toward a common goal of their maturity and their independence, which is what they want, then we can help them and they can be happy
Right.
and we can be happy.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about rules and rebellion. Where does this topic of respect, how do we integrate respect here into this picture?
Well, I think the way we relate to our kids and to each other is key. Our children aren't going to respect us if we're not speaking respectfully to them.
To them.
To them.
Yes.
Even when they misbehave.
Even when they misbehave, and that's hard to do.
Right, so raising your voice in anger at a child is a way of showing disrespect. And we don't like to be yelled at. And when I'm yelled at, what I do is not even consciously, I shut down. And I really don't hear what the individual is saying to me when I'm being yelled at. So to keep a calm voice, a steady voice, and a reassuring voice is...
And that might mean that you have to remove yourself from the situation at first and go and pray. I can't overemphasize the need for prayer, not just praying for our kids, but praying for our own attitudes and our own approach to our children.
So I don't feel like I have to handle this misbehavior, this situation right here, right now, right at this moment. But it's actually okay to take a step back and maybe go into your prayer closet before and ask God for wisdom before you deal with the
Absolutely.
rebellion.
Yeah.
Quite often we would send a child to timeout, and while they were in timeout, we were in the other room praying, and the children commented later, well, we knew we must have been really bad because you were in there a long time.
Long time.
If you have to pray about it, I'm really in trouble.
But that's a good thing. Again, so earlier you mentioned you send the kids to the room so they can calm down and think about what the issue was and their responsibility, their part in the issue. But then you also took that time for yourselves. And sometimes parents don't do that. They react immediately, and then they feel bad because they yelled, because they
Right.
punished them unfairly or whatever it is. So take the time. Both of you can really come up with a good plan as to what the next step will be.
Absolutely.
So we have talked about rules and rebellion and respect. What about responsibility? How do I know that I'm not expecting too much? You know, it's not that my child is misbehaving, but how do I know that it's an appropriate amount of responsibility that I'm giving my child?
That's a good question. I think doing the chore or the responsibility alongside them at first is a good indicator. I mean, if you want to decide if the child is ready for the responsibility of washing the dishes, you don't send them in with the sharp knives and say good luck. But you go in with them, and side by side you're working together, and you can watch them, and you give them instruction and tell them. And as time progresses, you see that they demonstrate the skill.
Right.
And as they develop wisdom and they are able to master skills, then you entrust them with more responsibility.
Yeah. And sometimes we think that the kids should have more responsibility than it's age appropriate.
Right.
And when they don't do it right, well, obviously then they're frustrated, we're angry, when it's not really fair to expect them to do what they simply can't. It's kind of like the parent that would say, why don't you act like a 5-year-old? Well, they are a 5-year-old. They're acting like a 5-year-old.
Right.
And we're actually expecting them to act like they're 10, which would be very difficult to do. So as we talk about parents, one of the things that we talk about is single parents, because it's so much more difficult.
Yes.
How can single parents, as busy as they are with 2, sometimes more jobs, how can they teach those things, that respect, that responsibility to their kids?
Well, the message is the same. They'll be conveying the same message. But I would say community is really important. I mean, we know that the ideal is a mother and a father in the home, and unfortunately, because of the sin-filled world that we're in, we don't have the ideal always. But we can choose to have community. So look for people who are on the same path that you want to be on. Connect with them.
The church is a good place for that.
Absolutely. I was raised by a single mom, and one of the things that she did for me during this age group is she found a guy in the church, a married guy without any children of his own, a mechanic, and asked him, "Can you take Eric under your wing and connect with him?"
Mentor you, give you that male role model.
Absolutely, and that's what he did.
And I think that community is important, whether it's a single parent household or an intact family with both parents there, because we all need that support. We all need help with the task at hand.
Yeah. That's so important. Thank you so much. I know that you have such a variety in ages of your kids, and you have learned a lot from them. And thank you for sharing those principles that you have experienced with them. Thank you for sharing them with us.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Having us.
And we also want to thank you for joining us as we explored some of the challenges around setting appropriate boundaries in our homes and dealing with rebellion. We also want to remind you to visit our parenting website, www.helpimaparent.org. There you will find many additional resources and materials.
As much as you love your children, God loves them even more. He's appointed you as their stewards, their caretakers during their lives here on earth. But more important, He has entrusted you with the task of preparing them for their forever home in heaven with Him.
God never said parenting would be easy, but He did say that He will never leave us or forsake us. The Creator who knit our children together in the womb and has numbered the very hairs on their heads holds the blueprint for their lives. Claim His promises and invite Him to co-parent with you.
Join us next time on Help, I'm a Parent, Christian Parenting in the Real World, when we will talk about the challenges surrounding this age of technology and how we as parents can do a better job of screening screen time. And until then, it is our prayer that God will grant you wisdom as you deal with those times of rebellion in your child. May God's love be reflected in you as you deal with those moments, and may you and your child both draw closer to Jesus as a result. We pray for the unconditional love of God to be seen in your family today.